The sound of the phone vibrating on the table echoed in the quiet room. Alex hesitated, fingers brushing the screen. A message from Julia. They'd been waiting for this moment, the moment when everything would fall into place. But as the words appeared on the screen, Alex's heart sank. "I'm just not ready for a relationship," the message read. "I hope you understand." Alex had poured their heart out, believed that the bond they shared could turn into something real. The truth, however, hit harder than they could have imagined. The one person they loved didn't feel the same. A crushing realization, raw and sharp. Alex stared at the phone, feeling the weight of their emotions crash over. The silence in the room became deafening. Alex sat in the dimly lit room, staring blankly at the wall as the weight of Julia's words continued to press on his chest. The hurt was suffocating. It wasn't just the rejection, but the sudden clarity that everything he had believed in was a lie. He had given Julia his heart, his trust, and yet it all felt so disposable. He tried to understand, tried to make sense of the sudden distance between them, but it was impossible. The quiet hum of the city outside felt distant and cold. He longed for a conversation that could make everything feel okay, but the silence was all-consuming. His phone remained on the table, its screen still glowing softly, the reminder of her rejection lingering. "Why didn't I see it sooner?" he thought. His mind raced, but there was no answer, just a hollow emptiness that filled the space between the once warm connection they had shared. Alex picked up the phone again, staring at the glowing screen in disbelief. It had been hours since Julia's message, but it still felt like it was happening in real time, each word etched into his memory. He read the message again, each sentence stinging more than the last. "I care about you, but not in the way you want," it said. The words replayed in his mind, repeating like a broken record. He had heard this line before, from exes, from friends, but somehow it hurt more this time. Julia wasn't just a casual fling. She was someone Alex had imagined his future with. The thought of her with someone else twisted the knife deeper. "How could she do this?" Alex whispered, as if hoping the question would somehow yield an answer. But no reply came. The silence filled the room once more, louder than anything else could be. It was in this moment that Alex realized he couldn't keep holding on. The idea of continuing to hope, to wait for something that wasn't ever going to come, seemed unbearable. His fingers clenched around the phone, but he didn't feel the strength to throw it. There was no anger, only a dull numbness that had taken over his body. He thought of the future, a future he had imagined so vividly, only to see it slip through his fingers like sand. "I should known," Alex muttered to himself, but even that felt like a lie. He had wanted so badly to believe in the possibility of love, to believe that he could be loved back. And yet here he was, standing on the edge of uncertainty, too afraid to look back and too lost to move forward. Hours passed in a blur. Alex couldn't remember when he had moved from the floor to his bed. The entire day had passed in an emotional haze, with each moment blending into the next. He wasn't sure what was worse, the ache in his chest or the loneliness that now felt like a permanent companion. He wanted to call his best friend Mia, but the thought of explaining what had happened, of saying the words out loud, felt impossible. How could he explain something so personal, so raw? Instead, he lay there, staring at the ceiling, as his mind continued to race through the memories of Julia, the times they had laughed together, the late-night conversations, and the little moments that felt like they meant so much. Now they all seemed meaningless. How could something that once felt so right turn into such a painful, empty reality? The days after the message felt like a blur to Alex. He had tried to go back to his routine, but nothing seemed to fill the emptiness inside him. He'd show up to work, fake a smile, and go through the motions. But every laugh, every small interaction felt like a performance. Julia's words echoed in his mind like a constant, relentless hum. He couldn't escape the feeling of rejection. Even when he was surrounded by people, he felt alone. He had tried to talk to his friends, but even their well-meaning advice only made things worse. They told him to move on, but it wasn't that simple. How do you let go of someone who was everything to you? How do you erase the memories of laughter, conversations, and promises of forever? The days grew longer, the nights even longer. In the quiet, his thoughts became louder. He missed Julia more than he cared to admit, but he was also starting to resent her for what she had done. She had taken something from him: his peace of mind, his sense of security, and the future he had envisioned. The worst part was knowing he couldn't even hate her. It was as though he was trapped in this limbo of pain, yearning for a closure that would never come. The loneliness began to feel like an old, unwanted companion. Alex's mind was always racing, but he couldn't seem to escape the memories. He would pass by places they used to visit, and it felt as though he was being haunted. He could still hear Julia's voice in his head, their conversations echoing like they had just happened moments ago. Every spot he'd been with her, his favorite cafe, the park bench where they had kissed, was now a painful reminder of what had been lost. Even walking down the street felt like an emotional minefield, with the city buzzing around him, but he was caught in his own world, locked in a place he couldn't leave. Sometimes he thought he saw Julia in a crowd, a fleeting glimpse of her dark hair or the familiar curve of her smile. His heart would leap in his chest, only to fall again when he realized it wasn't her. It wasn't the person he had loved so deeply. His friends suggested he take a break, maybe go out to clear his head, but he couldn't bring himself to go anywhere. The very thought of being surrounded by people, pretending to be okay, filled him with dread. His world had shrunk, and he had no idea how to rebuild it. One evening, Alex found himself sitting by his window, staring out into the night. The city lights flickered in the distance, a world that seemed so far away from the one he was now trapped in. He thought about how quickly things had changed. Just a few months ago, he had been so sure of everything. He had felt secure, loved, and hopeful for the future. Now there was nothing but an endless void, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't fill it. He reached for his phone again, almost without thinking, and scrolled through his messages. He had sent her countless texts since that day, most of them unsent, never delivered. Part of him wanted to hear her voice again, even if it was just one last time, but he knew it wouldn't change anything. He would never get the closure he so desperately craved. As the night stretched on, he wondered if he would ever find a way to move past this, or if this feeling of longing would haunt him forever. The thought made his chest tighten. How do you let go of someone who was never truly yours? Alex's attempts to reach out to his friends had been futile. They didn't understand, couldn't understand. They told him he was overthinking, that he needed to just let go and move on. But how could he? The memories were everywhere. Every song on the radio reminded him of her. Every place they had visited together was now tinged with sorrow. He tried to fill his time with work, but it was as if his mind was constantly racing, always drifting back to her. There was no escape, and the emotional fatigue was beginning to take its toll. His body felt heavy, his mind sluggish. He found himself going through the motions, but nothing seemed to bring him joy. His friends had stopped asking him to hang out, tired of his constant sadness. He felt like he was becoming a burden. The isolation was starting to sink in. The loneliness was deafening, and Alex felt himself becoming a shell of the person he used to be. It seemed like everyone around him was moving on with their lives, but he was stuck in this dark, stagnant place. It was hard to even remember what happiness had felt like. Was there even a way out of this? Alex sat in his apartment one night, scrolling through old pictures of him and Julia. There were so many happy moments, so many promises, and yet none of it mattered now. She was gone, and no amount of reminiscing could bring her back. He had wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could work things out. But the truth was clear. She didn't feel the same. He had given her everything, and now he had nothing. Alex wondered how someone could become such a huge part of your life, only to disappear so easily. He thought about how much he had changed, how much he had invested in this relationship that was never meant to be. As the hours passed, Alex realized that he needed to stop clinging to the past. But how do you let go of someone who still occupies every corner of your heart, even when they've walked away? The day had arrived when Alex couldn't hold back any longer. The constant ache, the gnawing need for closure, had driven him to the brink. He had to confront Julia. He couldn't keep pretending that things were okay, that he was fine. It wasn't fair to himself or to her. She deserved to know how deeply he had felt for her, how much he had invested in their connection. The idea of seeing her again filled him with both anticipation and fear, a mixture of hope and dread. He hadn't seen her since the last time they spoke, when she broke his heart with her words. The night before, Alex had rehearsed what he would say 1,000 times. But now that the moment had come, the words seemed inadequate. He simply wanted her to understand how much it hurt, how much he loved her, and how lost he had felt after her rejection. It wasn't about trying to win her back. No, that ship had sailed long ago. It was about letting go in the only way he knew how, with honesty. As he made his way to the cafe they used to frequent, Alex couldn't help but wonder if this would be the final chapter, or if it was just the beginning of a new kind of pain. Alex pushed open the door of the cafe, the bell above it ringing softly as he stepped inside. His heart beat faster, and he felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Everything was so familiar, and yet everything had changed. Julia sat at their usual table by the window, her hair now shorter than he remembered, her smile distant and polite as she looked up. She wasn't the same person he had fallen in love with. That person was still locked in his memories, but this Julia was a stranger, a version of her that had moved on while he had stayed stuck in the past. She looked up, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Her smile faltered. She had been expecting this, hadn't she? She knew this conversation was inevitable, and yet, when the time came, neither of them were ready for it. Alex felt his throat tighten, the words he had rehearsed over and over again, now slipping away. He didn't know where to begin, how to start a conversation that had been building up for months, the weight of it all suffocating. "I've been thinking about you," Alex finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I need to say what's been on my mind." Alex sat down across from her, the space between them feeling so much larger than it ever had before. The familiar comfort they once shared seemed like a distant memory, replaced by an awkward silence that neither of them knew how to fill. He couldn't stop looking at her, taking in every detail. Her eyes, once so full of warmth and affection, now seemed guarded, distant. He thought about the way she used to laugh, the way her smile would light up a room, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of longing. He had to say something. He couldn't just sit there in silence, pretending that everything was fine. "I don't want to fight," he said, his voice shaky. "I just need you to know how much I loved you, how much I still care." Julia's eyes flickered with emotion, but she didn't say anything right away. The silence lingered, heavy and suffocating. The words they both needed to say seemed stuck in their throats, trapped by the years of unspoken feelings and broken promises. Alex's hands clenched into fists under the table. He wanted to scream, to let her know how much this hurt, but all he could do was sit there and hope she understood. Julia finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I never meant to hurt you, Alex." The words felt like they were meant to comfort him, but they only made things worse. He could hear the sincerity in her voice, but it didn't ease the ache in his chest. It didn't take away the betrayal that had been building ever since that first moment when she had told him she didn't feel the same way. "I know," Alex replied, his voice tight. "But you did, and I don't know how to just move on from that." Julia's face softened, and for a moment, Alex thought she might reach out to him, that maybe they could find some resolution in this conversation. But then she pulled back, her eyes clouded with sadness. "I never wanted to hurt you, Alex. But I can't be what you want me to be." It felt like a punch to the gut. He knew what she was saying, but hearing the words aloud made everything real. The love he had given her, the future he had imagined, was never going to happen. It was over. And somehow, that realization stung more than the rejection itself. The conversation tapered off, neither of them knowing what more could be said. Julia stood up first, the movement sudden and final. She looked at Alex one last time, her eyes filled with an emotion he couldn't name. "I'm sorry," she whispered, then turned to leave. The door chimed as it closed behind her, leaving Alex alone at the table. He sat there, motionless, for what felt like an eternity, staring at the spot where she had been. His heart ached, but there was something else too, a sense of finality. She was gone, and so was the future he had imagined with her. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to cry. The tears had run dry. He knew that this chapter had ended, and although the pain would linger, he would eventually learn how to live with it. For now, though, Alex couldn't move. He just sat there, lost in his thoughts, in the quiet of the cafe, and tried to make peace with the emptiness that surrounded him. Alex tried to focus on work, but the thought of Julia lingered like a shadow in his mind, never truly leaving him. It had been a week since their painful conversation in the cafe, and yet every day felt the same, empty. The weight of her absence was suffocating. It wasn't until he met Marco for a drink one evening that the truth began to unravel. Marco, his old friend, seemed more distant than usual, hesitant even, as they chatted about mundane topics. But then, as if trying to avoid a confrontation, Marco dropped a bombshell. "I think you should know something," Marco said, his voice low, his eyes avoiding Alex. "Julia has been seeing someone else." The words hit Alex like a punch to the gut. His mind went blank for a moment, not quite able to process what he had just heard. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice shaky. Marco hesitated, then explained that Julia had started dating someone a few weeks before their breakup. The details weren't clear, but the fact that Julia had kept this secret from Alex, something that felt so personal, so raw, stung deeper than anything else. He had been living a lie, and the revelation cut through him like a knife. Marco's eyes were filled with pity, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. In that moment, Alex realized that the betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was deliberate. Julia hadn't been honest, and now everything he had believed in felt like a cruel joke. Alex left the bar, his head spinning, his mind consumed by Marco's words. He didn't want to believe it, but the nagging feeling in his gut told him everything he needed to know. He had been lied to, deceived in a way that was so cold, so calculated, that it left him speechless. All of those times he had been patient, waiting for Julia to open up, waiting for her to choose him, felt like a cruel waste of time. The moment he stepped into the night air, he could feel the sharp bite of the cold, a reflection of the sudden chill that had settled over his heart. He walked aimlessly, the city streets bustling around him, but he felt detached from everything. As he passed familiar places he had once visited with Julia, he couldn't help but feel a sense of loss, of betrayal. How long had Julia been seeing this person? Had he been part of her life while Alex was still holding on to the idea of them? The unanswered questions gnawed at him, and the anger began to build. How could she do this to him? He had given her everything. In the pit of his stomach, Alex knew that this wasn't just about the romantic betrayal. It was about being deceived, about being made a fool of. He thought he had known Julia, thought she had been honest with him, but now all that remained was doubt and the bitter sting of betrayal. The next morning, Alex tried to carry on with his day as usual, but the sense of betrayal was suffocating. He couldn't stop thinking about Julia, about how easily she had moved on while he was still reeling from the shock of their breakup. As the hours passed, he found himself pacing around his apartment, unable to focus on anything. He kept replaying Marco's words in his mind, each repetition making the pain sharper. He thought about calling Julia, confronting her, demanding answers, but part of him knew it wouldn't change anything. What was left to say? She had already made her choice, and Alex was just a casualty of it. But the idea of being lied to, of being kept in the dark while she moved on with someone else, felt like a betrayal of the worst kind. Alex knew he needed closure, but he wasn't sure how to get it. The unanswered questions kept swirling in his mind. Had Julia ever really cared about him? Or had she just been pretending, leading him on for months? In his heart, Alex wanted to believe the best of her, but the evidence now told a different story. And with that realization came a crushing weight of disappointment. A few days later, Alex found himself standing in front of Julia's apartment building. His mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, hurt, confusion, but also an overwhelming desire for closure. He had told himself that he wouldn't let her back into his life, that he would walk away and never look back. But the betrayal stung too deeply. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more, something he needed to understand. Maybe if he just confronted her one last time, he would finally get the answers he was searching for. As he stood there, he tried to prepare himself for what he was about to do. He had no idea how this conversation would unfold, but he knew it was the only way to move on. He rang the doorbell, his heart pounding in his chest, unsure of what he would find on the other side. When the door opened, Julia looked surprised but not entirely caught off guard. Her expression was guarded, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Alex didn't know what to say, didn't know how to start this conversation that had been weighing on him for days. But in the silence, everything came rushing back. The love he had given, the trust he had placed in her, and the painful truth that she had betrayed him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked, his voice breaking. "Why keep it a secret? Why let me believe in something that wasn't real?" Julia looked down, her hands clasped in front of her, as if searching for the right words. But there was nothing she could say that would undo the damage. "I'm sorry, Alex," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I never meant to hurt you. But I wasn't being fair to either of us." Her apology, though sincere, felt hollow. And as Alex stood there, staring at her, he realized that no matter what she said, it didn't change the fact that the person he had loved was gone. He didn't know if he would ever be able to forgive her, but he knew one thing for sure. This was the end. Alex sat in his car outside Julia's apartment, hands gripping the steering wheel. The anger he had been holding inside for weeks was finally bubbling to the surface. He had spent so long trying to make sense of her actions, trying to understand what had gone wrong. But now he knew. Julia hadn't just been distant, she had been manipulative. This wasn't a case of two people growing apart. It was a betrayal on a deeper level. Alex wasn't going to leave until he had the answers he needed. His heart raced as he stepped out of the car and walked toward the building. He wasn't sure if this would fix anything, but he couldn't keep living in the shadows of lies anymore. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Julia, standing in front of him with a look of surprise, but not guilt. Alex didn't give her a chance to speak. "You owe me an explanation," he said, his voice sharp. Julia's eyes flickered with uncertainty, but she quickly masked it with a forced calm. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she began, but Alex wasn't buying it anymore. "You lied to me. You made me believe something that wasn't true. You manipulated me." Julia opened her mouth to speak, but Alex cut her off again. "I'm done being your fool," he said, his chest tightening with each word. She stood there, silent, as if trying to find the words that would justify everything, but Alex had heard enough. It was time to walk away. "Why did you do it?" Alex asked, his voice filled with hurt. Julia shifted uncomfortably. "I wasn't happy," she admitted quietly, "but I didn't know how to leave." Her confession only fueled Alex's anger. He had given her everything, trusted her completely, and now she was admitting that all of it had been a lie. He had been nothing more than a placeholder while she figured out what she wanted. His heart felt heavy, and for a moment it was hard to breathe. He had thought he knew who Julia was, but now the person in front of him was a stranger. There were no more words to be said. Alex turned away, not looking back. Alex walked away, the heavy weight of finality settling in his chest. He couldn't fix this. The damage was done. Julia's apologies, her explanations, meant nothing now. The betrayal had cut too deep, and the trust that once existed was gone. He could feel the anger still simmering beneath the surface, but it was mixed with a sense of relief. At least now he knew the truth. At least now he could start to let go. He didn't want to carry the pain of this relationship any longer. He had to move on, even if it meant leaving behind a piece of his heart that would never fully heal. As Alex walked down the street, he felt a mix of anger and emptiness. The finality of it all was setting in. Julia's actions had broken him, but in some strange way, he also felt a sense of freedom. He had confronted her, spoken his truth, and now he could finally begin to heal. It wouldn't be easy, but it was a start. Walking away wasn't just about leaving Julia behind. It was about reclaiming himself. The betrayal had stolen so much from him, but it wouldn't steal his future. He had to trust that in time, the pain would fade. He wasn't sure how long it would take, but for the first time in months, Alex allowed himself a small glimmer of hope. The days passed, each one dragging like the last. Alex felt numb, walking through life without truly living. He stayed in touch with his friends, trying to fill the silence with distractions, but the weight of the past still clung to him. He realized now that healing wasn't a straightforward path. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live with the pain, to move forward despite it. Some days he felt hopeful, but others were filled with frustration. But slowly, the heavy fog that had consumed him began to lift, even if just a little. Alex knew the road to healing would be long, and some days it would feel impossible. But in those quiet moments when he wasn't fighting the pain, he could sense something inside him starting to change. It wasn't easy, and he was far from being whole again. But for the first time in a long time, Alex had a flicker of hope. One evening, Alex decided to go for a walk, something he hadn't done in months. The crisp air felt refreshing, grounding him in the present. He passed familiar places, places that once felt filled with painful memories. But tonight, there was a shift. The memories didn't sting as much. He realized that he was starting to reclaim these spaces, to make new association. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about giving himself permission to heal and move forward. The more he walked, the more he felt a sense of freedom. Freedom from the weight of his heartbreak, from the constant rehashing of what went wrong. Maybe, just maybe, there was life beyond the pain, and that thought gave him the courage to keep walking, step by step, into a future that wasn't defined by his past. As weeks went by, Alex started finding solace in the little things. Long talks with friends, quiet mornings with a cup of coffee, and even the occasional laugh. He had begun to see the value in these simple moments. They didn't erase the past, but they softened the edges of his pain. He still thought about Julia, and sometimes the memories would come rushing back. but now he could acknowledge them without allowing them to define him. One evening, while watching the sunset alone in the park, Alex found himself smiling, not out of force, but because he felt grateful for the peace he had slowly built. It wasn't the perfect ending he had once hoped for, but it was his story now, and he was learning to be okay with that. One evening, Alex received a message from Sarah, one of his closest friends. It was simple, a check-in to see how he was doing. He hadn't spoken to Sarah in a while, and her words felt like a lifeline. "Hey Alex, just wanted to say, I'm proud of how far you've come. Take care of yourself." Those few words hit harder than he expected. They weren't dramatic or life-changing, but they felt like a quiet affirmation that Alex was on the right path. For the first time in months, Alex allowed himself to feel proud. He had been through so much, but he was still standing. Healing wasn't about reaching some grand destination. It was about embracing the small victories along the way. And right now, Alex was taking a moment to appreciate how far he had come. As the days turned into weeks, Alex started to feel like himself again. He wasn't the same person he was before the heartbreak, but in a way, that was okay. He had learned to navigate the grief, the loneliness, and the confusion. He had learned to lean on his friends, to embrace moments of quiet peace, and to slowly rebuild his sense of self. One evening, while watching a movie alone, Alex realized that he wasn't sad anymore. He wasn't angry. He was just content. The pain had faded, leaving behind a quiet sense of resilience. It wasn't perfect, but it was his reality now. And for the first time in a long time, Alex felt okay with it. Alex stood at the edge of the park, the same place where his heart had shattered months ago. He had come a long way since then. His steps were steady, his posture strong. He wasn't the same man who had once been consumed by pain and longing. The past had shaped him, but it no longer defined him. He had learned to set boundaries, to walk away from what no longer served him. Today he felt free. He looked at the space around him, empty yet filled with potential. It was time to leave the past behind. There was no more waiting for someone else to fill the void. Alex had realized that the only person who could heal him was himself. With a final breath, he smiled, knowing that this was the moment he had been working toward. He had found his peace. Later that evening, Alex sat on the couch, his phone lying next to him. He didn't feel the need to check it. He had stopped waiting for messages that would never come. For the first time in a long while, he was content in his own company. There were no more lingering doubts, no more questions about what could have been. He had let go of the weight that had once held him down. The journey had been long, but it had taught him invaluable lessons about self-worth, boundaries, and the importance of moving forward. With a sigh, he leaned back and closed his eyes, knowing he was finally at peace. Weeks later, Alex met up with his friends for dinner. They laughed, reminisced, and shared stories. But this time, Alex didn't feel like the outsider. He wasn't carrying the weight of his past anymore. He was present, engaged, and for the first time, fully part of the moment. He realized that the pain he had once felt had transformed into something else: wisdom, resilience, and a deeper understanding of himself. As he looked around the table at the people who had supported him through it all, Alex felt a quiet sense of gratitude. He didn't need to chase happiness anymore. It was already here within him. The days ahead were uncertain, but Alex no longer feared the unknown. He had learned that growth didn't come from staying in the comfort of what was familiar. It came from facing the challenges, the pain, and learning how to rise above it. The future felt full of possibility. Alex no longer clung to the past. He embraced the unknown with open arms. For the first time, he saw the beauty in change. He didn't need the validation of others, only the assurance that he was enough just as he was. And that, in itself, was liberating. Alex took one last look at the life he had left behind, not with regret, but with gratitude. He had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that healing came from within. As he moved forward, there would be new challenges, but Alex was no longer afraid. He was stronger, wiser, and had a deeper sense of himself than ever before. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. With one final breath, Alex smiled, knowing he was ready for whatever came next.